multimeter to the battery. And you want to check the battery.
Ayan na.
Kuha nyo. So, kailangan 12.6 ang ating battery. Good charge. 12.4, 75%. 12.2, 50%. 12 volts, 25. Then 11.9. Discharge na yung ating battery. Okay? So, ito yung voltage natin na naka-idle. Hindi naka-red. Hindi naka-RPM. 12.6.
Voltage. Then you can start the car and see the alternator charging voltage. As you can see, I have around 13.9 volts, and that indicates a good charging voltage. Charging voltage in a car depends on four main factors: running temperature of the alternator, state of charge of the battery, load on the alternator, and the battery temperature. In general, a range between 13.5 volts and 15 volts is considered as a good charging voltage. But modern cars have ECU controlled alternators that has a much wider range. So you want to check the service manual for your car to find out the exact voltage range for your car's alternator before you start testing. You can find these service manuals online, or you can buy a book like this. They are real handy and they have all the information you need. Then you're going to do a load test on the alternator. You're going to turn on the headlights, AC, and as many accessories as you can. This will increase the electrical demand on the alternator. Alternators have higher efficiency at higher RPMs. So you can raise the RPM to around 2,000. In this car, the rated alternator voltage range is between 13.2 volts and 14.8 volts. As you can see, I'm getting around 13.5 volts, which is well.
Ha? Ngayon nakabukas lahat ng accessories, naging
13.75 kanina.
So pag nagbukas ng accessories, kailangan hindi yan babagsak sa 12.9 volts. Kasi talo na yun.
Space. Just like the battery, alternators also have positive and negative terminals.
So
Positive terminal is called B-post. It is connected to the battery using a cable, and the cable goes inside the wiring harness, to the fuse box, and onto the battery. Negative terminal is the alternator housing. Here's the negative wire going out from the battery, and it is bolted onto the car's chassis. So the entire car's chassis becomes a giant negative terminal. So different components in the car can share the body as a ground connection. Here's the ground wire goes to the engine. Because the alternator is bolted onto the engine, the alternator housing becomes a ground for the alternator. Then you want to connect the multimeter directly to the alternator. Now we have to compare this reading against the previous reading given in the battery. If you see 10.5 volts of difference in the readings, you have voltage drop between the battery and the alternator. So you will find where the drop is. Let's check the positive side first. Connect the red lead to the B post and the black lead to the positive battery post. The reading should be less than 0.2 volts, and I only have a few millivolts.
Voltage
If the reading is about 0.2 volts, you want to check the
ano yung test niya kanina? Sa alternator and the battery. So meron siyang difference na voltage drop na 0.2 volts.
B post and the cable, and also between the cable and the battery post. If those connections are good, then the cable.
Ayan. Okay. Voltage drop, positive side, between the B post, okay, and the cable. Battery post to. B post is the battery post. Okay?
If it's bad, and you have to replace it. To test the ground connection, connect the red lead to the alternator housing and the black lead to the negative post of the battery. Again, the reading should be more than 22 volts. You have bad ground somewhere. So you want to check all the ground connections until you find the bad ground.
Kaya yung iba
You
nagtataka
also want to
bakit
check the alternator mount because that is where the
ito umaga
alternator is
nadi-discharge.
If you found any
Kasi
bad
kung may ground yung
positive
alternator
connections,
natin,
you want to take them
okay
off,
naman yung charge.
give it a good clean, apply some silicone paste, and reinstall them back. That's how we do a basic alternator test using a multimeter. Diagnosing alternator issues in a car requires some serious testing than this.
Bago tayo
Let's
bumaba.
start from trial balance. Alternators are driven by drive
Tulog ka
belts.
muna.
So if you hear a screaming noise when the engine is running and your alternator is undercharging, the first thing you
Ano
want
ba
to
yung
check is
kanina
your drive belt to
tinitignan
see
ko
if
kung
the
may
phone hand put to the
nag-discharge
bolts.
siya.
Mas
If
may
you use
ground
the
text.
showing
Sa
signs
baba,
of
mas
the
may,
belt, that
may
indicates
nakuha
your
tayong
belt.
buuin mo na to.
Replace the belt.
Bababa tayo.
If the belt is too loose, you may have a bad
Try
belt
natin
tension.
ba?
You have replaced that. Some modern alternators
Nakikita mo din sa
come with
nakalagay, no?
decouplers, which act as a clutch to
Nakalagay yung
eliminate
socket.
vibrations. So they are but they can fail and may create a overcharging condition. A failed decoupling will make a rattling noise right after you stop the engine, and eventually it
Tinanggal ko
will
kanina.
rattle all the time.
Yun lang, wala ko nalalagay
Replace
dito.
the decoupler, you get a fix like this to take it to
Hirap
the
na hirap kung walang naalala ni
Now,
Ina.
that's what I'm talking about. That is all the clutch material from the
Dito to
bottom
eh, di ba?
clutch.
May ano na. May kunting knowledge na.
Ito kaya, ipasok mo muna.
Oo nga pala.
If you don't have an impact wrench, you can also
Ito,
use
no?
a breaker bar with some
Ayan, bro.
WD-40. Now it is time to take a look inside the alternator. First, you will remove these 3 bolts to take off the dust shield. Then you will remove these 4 bolts so you can take off the front housing. If your alternator is rattling and if it is not the decoupler pulley, then it's the bearings that making the noise.
Kaya ito yan. Ganyan.
And look how easy it is to replace them. Alternators use electromagnetic induction to generate electricity. So the alternator also needs some electricity from the battery. So if you have a no charge or an intermittent charging
Ganyan,
machine,
ito.
the first thing you want to check is the power connection to the alternator. You can easily do this with a multimeter. So you connect the black lead to the negative
Ito pa,
battery terminal
dito yung
and use the red lead to contact each terminal inside the connector. The top tip here is to get a small pin to probe into the connector so you wouldn't damage the terminals. You can also use a test light or a power probe for this, and you can use a wiring diagram in your service manual to identify the wires. If you're getting a bad reading at the connector, then you have to check all the wiring for any shorts or damaged wires. You also want to check the fuses and relays for the alternator. A good fuse should look like this. Modern cars are
Yung
very
wire okay lang,
sensitive
di ba?
to
Okay lang yung
voltage
ano?
variances.
okay lang.
So you want to check all the fuses for resistance
Okay
and
lang.
make sure that they are all
Okay.
within specs.
Yung kanina.
To test relays, you can use some jumper wires to manually operate the relay,
Ito.
or you can get a relay tester like this. They are real easy to work with and also very inexpensive. In some
Relay
cases, the
tester yan. May
power
nabibili
output
sa Temu
of the
niyan.
alternator is
35
controlled by the
real.
ECU. In this type of a design, you can use a jumper wire to bypass the ECU and manually supply power or ground to the alternator. If the alternator is then working, then either the wire coming from the ECU is bad, or the ECU itself is bad. If that is the case with you, you have 3 options. Bypass the ECU, rebuild the ECU, or replace the ECU. Before we go any further, we have to learn how alternators
Bakit
work.
siya mabilis lang mag-backlash?
When the alternator is getting current from the battery, this current goes straight into the
Mabaklas
voltage
na agad.
regulator. Depending on the battery voltage, the voltage regulator then adjusts the amount of current it passes onto the brush assembly. The brush assembly is contacting these 2 slip rings, so this rotor is now getting current. Rotor has a lot of copper winding, so when the rotor is getting current, it becomes an electromagnet. Around the rotor is the stator, and it's also made of 3 separate copper windings. Each end of the winding is connected to a couple of diodes. So when the rotor is spinning, it induces a current on the stator. Because the rotor is continuously spinning, the polarity of the magnetism received by the stator is also continuously changing, so as the direction of the current being generated on the stator. This is called the alternative current. Because the car needs direct current, this current is then sent through a couple of diodes to convert into the direct current. Because the stator has 3 separate windings and each one needs 2 diodes for the conversion, 6 diodes are needed in total. This 6-pack of diodes is called the rectifier. The other end of the rectifier is the V-post. So this DC converted current is going to the battery. Now we have test each of these components. To test the voltage regulator, you're going to rev up your engine to around 2000 RPM and you're going to take a reading on the multimeter. Then you're going to raise the RPM a few times and see the voltage again. You shouldn't see a rise in the voltage between 5
Naririnig
Naka
yung
2,000
PG niya.
I can study a reading of 13.9 at over
Taas,
times.
sa cellphone?
If the
Oo,
voltage is
naririnig
rising
din
as
niya.
a
May application niya.
that means the voltage regulator is bad. This is the main reason for an overcharging condition. On
Voltage
most
regulator.
alternators, voltage regulator is very easy to replace. Modern cars have ECU controlled alternators, where the power supply to the alternator is regulated by the car's computer. If a wire that carries current can be turned on and off multiple times in a very short period of time, the average voltage on the wire can be changed. The percentage of the time the wire is turned on in a given time scale is called the duty cycle. So in ECU controlled alternators, ECU is sending a duty cycle signal to the voltage regulator, which means the current on the wire goes to the alternator is turned on and off hundreds of times a second. By controlling the duty cycle, ECU can control the average voltage on the wire. When the voltage regulator receives this pulsing signal, the alternator can then generate just the right amount of electricity the ECU needs. Voltage regulator also sends a signal back to the ECU so that the ECU knows how much current is generated at the alternator. Basically, what you need to do is to identify the two wires that comes from and goes to the ECU and check the duty cycle on both wires. If the ECU is not sending a duty cycle, then the wiring between the ECU and the alternator is bad, or the ECU itself is bad. You need to know that ECU is also receiving data from other sensors to decide the duty cycle that goes to the alternator. So to test this entire system, you need to have an OBD2 scanner that can read live data. On the other hand, if the voltage regulator is not sending a signal back to the ECU, then the voltage regulator is bad. Unfortunately, you cannot test a duty cycle signal using a multimeter, and you need to have an automotive scope for that, and they are very expensive. That's how you test a voltage regulator in an ECU control alternator. The next thing you want to check is the brush assembly. Because the brushes are spring-loaded, against the slip rings. If they are worn out and too which might cause an intermittent charging issue and lead to non-transmission windshield. And make sure they are rings. If the brushes are broken, you can easily replace them. The top tip here is to use a pin to lock the brushes in place so you can easily place them around the rotor. To check the rotor, you can do a simple continuity test. And also the resistance.
Ano?
Testing the stator is similar to testing the rotor. You just have to check the continuity. Now we have come to the rectifier. Rectifier acts as a one-way for the current. So turn the dial
Naman sa akin
on
dito,
the
no?
mark
Ano,
and connect
ito
one
na
lead to
Lalo
the
kaming
post
nalilito.
and the other lead onto the alternating housing.
Ano ganyan?
Then you must swap the leads over.
Oh, para
And
yung
see where you
carbon
need.
brush.
If the rectifier is good, you should have very high rating in one direction and zero rating in the other direction. If you're doing this test while the alternator is in the car, then take off all the connections before you begin. Another way to check the rectifier is to check the
Masama yung daliri
alternator
ko.
current output on the alternator. Even though the alternator is supplying direct current,
Yung
there
magagalit
is
sa isa
no
doon.
alternating current is still coming from the rectifier. So now you're going to turn the dial into AC volts and see the rating.
Ba,
For many older
didikit
cars, the
talaga.
rating should be less than 50 millivolts, but some modern cars are rated up to 100 millivolts. This is a very important test to do an alternator. An alternator can have very good charging voltage, but it may put out too much AC current into the car's electrical system, which can trip trouble codes in other computer control systems, which are designed to run by DC current. Also, an internally shorted out rectifier is a very common reason to have an overnight battery
Naipit
drain.
ata yung ano. Wala.
Okay. Subuhin nyo na yan. And then, bababa tayo, mag-actual tayo.